questions about fused vertebrae. What was the question?
Just what is it? How does it affect Pilates? Blah blah blah. What kind of Pilates exercises?
Okay, what type of Pilates exercises? Sort of a nonsensical question to some extent, but I'll explain why. So,
what is it?
for purposes of the course, it is worked on that. Other than they've got a slip disc, there's a normal vertebra, a normal spinal column. They've got no issues at all. Yeah? And we're just trying to work the spine. Pilates himself said everything's to do with the spine. The spine, never once mentioned the core. For him, the king was the spine. We try and move the spine in all the different directions it can go, with forward flexion, in extension, lateral flexion, lateral just means to the sides, and in rotation. Move it in all that. That's pertinent when we come on to talk about in one of the other inputs about osteoporosis, infamous study. So the spine moves in any combination of those ways, yeah? And we're assuming no one's got any issues there. Now, although I use an analogy that I like to visualise the spine as if you're into cycling, have you ever put a brand spanking new chain on, took an old chain off and put a brand spanking new bike chain on? Oh, it's orgasmic, it's lovely. Every single link moves dead easy. You take the old one off and it's struggling to bend in places. And that's what happens with the spine basically. Now, it's not the perfect analogy because the bones are shaped differently. Every single one is different shape. Even though they might share a common sort of theme, the lumbar spine is big, there's lumbar vertebral column is a certain shape, but every single one is slightly different, and it varies from person to person. And that's pertinent with certain bones in particular. Is it T1? Tends to be the longest spinous process, and on people it can vary. It's why it can be quite bony on some people. Now, I'm not about the buffalo hump where it's fat deposits. On some people that can be much longer than in relation to the others. It is meant to be one of the longest ones, I believe, spinous process. I think I'm right in saying that. Not densest, but longest. Or the way it's angled, more correctly, the way it's angled, it sticks out a bit more. Something to bear in mind when people do certain movements. Yeah? Or when they're just lying down. Likewise, that's called the sacrum. You've got a sacral angle, largely dependent on the shape of your L5 bone. The shape and size of that can vary to people, which can affect the angle of the, and it's also not genetic. What's the word I'm looking for? So certain people's angle. Okay, so Asian women, they haven't got a great sacral angle. Eh? Ethnicity can vary. Yeah. Also, they haven't got, from an evolutionary point of view, there's not a lot of fat tissue on the bum, and there's not a lot of muscle on the bum. They're relatively flat there. Whereas you might get some African women, the sacral angle is greater, and there's more fat deposit and more muscle around that area, which can, you've got to be careful with the postural assessments, create the illusion that they've all got a low doses there when they haven't. It's the illusion of, like a shelf there almost, yeah, of muscle or fat. But anyway, just something to bear in mind, people's sacral angle is different. Some people, you might have it yourself, you might have had it in a class where just sitting down, the bone there, they've got to sit on something, or even lying down, it sticks out too much. People are different, and that's the biggest thing we're going to stress on this course, yeah? So, that's one way of visualise. It's like when you're rolling down and rolling up, visualise the spine as a bike chain. You're trying to let every link move, not the same, because they're different shapes. They won't move the same, but you get the idea. You're trying to create as much freedom in all the different ways each vertebra can move. Slightly lumbar down, they tend to be more, obviously they're fused, the lumbar spine is fused, the sacrum is fused. And what can happen sometimes when people are hypermobile in the lower back is what happens when they're fused is one extra bone might not be fused and they'll have an extra lumbar bone. Overall it's the same amount, just one hasn't fused in the sacrum and they've got an extra one. They tend to be really hypermobile. Conversely, the opposite can happen and one of those lumbar vertebrae can be fused to the sacrum. And they tend to be hypomobile in the lower back. All the Pilates in the world will do nothing for fused bones. Nothing whatsoever. Yeah? All it can do is try and help increase certain ranges of motion elsewhere to try and accommodate that.
Is that something that somebody would have been born with?
Yeah. Not born with, technically being pedantic, it's when these naturally tend to ossify, it's when they ossifies as a youngster, as a child, baby, the extra bone will be fused, either fused in or not. So not everyone has 5 lumbar vertebrae, some have 6, some have 4. So again, the biggest thing I want to stress is you wouldn't be forcing anyone to do anything, but you get the idea. Some people will not be able to get physically not in to a position. Okay, that's, I'll say quite normal. I don't know what the statistics are for that. The so-called norm, no such thing as normal, will be 5 lumbar vertebrae. Everyone's hilariously happy with that. Okay. So I don't know whether you'd technically class it as a pathology, but what can sometimes happen, and I've got a couple of clients with this, you can have a fused vertebra anywhere along the spine. I had a client who was somewhere in the thoracic, where on both sides it was fused. Just these two bones, or somewhere here, have just been fused together. That's going to affect how they move. Yeah? Probably more problematic is where it's, I've had a client with this, where it's fused, just so maybe them two were fused just on one side. This can happen almost anywhere in the spine. The ones that I've personally come across have been the thoracic, where it's been not artificial, it's been fused just by nature for whatever genetic reason. Either fused on both sides, tend to be less problematic where it's fused on one side. It just affects it. It's not that there's anything special, extra movements to give them or to avoid. They will usually know, because it's more of a birth thing, it's when the bones are ossified, it tends to be that anyway, from a bit when these bones are fused, it tends to be from that reason. Yeah? So they usually managed it for years, and they'll usually know what they can do, what they can't do. That's if it's being diagnosed, they know why they've got the restriction. This is why you never, again, label the point, you'd never be forcing anyone to, although you do get clients, we do cover that, where, oh, you need to go down, you never, there's hands-on as in you just touch and maybe helping us, not get down, you should be in this. And we've had clients, known teachers elsewhere that will do that. For one very good reason, they might not have a diagnosis. They could have any combination of fused, you don't know what issues you've got going on in someone's body. It's why you're trying to encourage them to move as freely as they possibly can on that day. This goes for anyone, forget fused vertebrae. Yeah, because it can change from days, they can change morning to night. They do work in the classic one we get a lot every year. Spring, nice weather, they haven't been out in the garden for ages, they spend 8 hours. It's technically exercise as far as your body's concerned, and you wonder why. They always blame you Pilates, by the way. They will, they do. You saw you've been doing it for how long? 8 hours all day, all weekend, Saturday and Sunday, yeah. So you come to do a Pilates class which you've been doing for the last 7 years, and apparently it's the Pilates, not the, but anyway. So, there's another type of fused you can get, and it's artificial. It's where you've had an accident or some sort of trauma and have pinned it. Yeah? Usually they're governed by what the consultants have said initially, but some people have had a fuse for donkey's years. They'll usually know their limitations. They will know. There's not necessarily a different exercise to do. Does that make sense? It's more a case of they will have issues getting into a certain position. Depends on where it's fused and how it's fused. Everyone's very happy with that. Yeah? Whenever we do any sort of roll-ups, we stress, slightly different from Joseph Pilates. Back then it was, in fact on some of us, you ram the head back. I'm sure I think he actually uses those words. You wouldn't ram anything back, and you certainly don't take stuff, anything particular, onto your neck, your head and neck. That's why I mentioned one before, the crab, where he literally lands on the forehead, the weight on the forehead, and roll over to the ground. We don't, I'll demonstrate that. You can have a go if you really want to, but it really is an action that needs to happen for most people. So yeah, there's not necessarily, it's just to be aware of that. There's not necessarily anything special to give them, because if it's fused, it's fused. You're not going to get any mobility there, any extra mobility there. So it's no good if you know they've got a fused vertebra on the lateral side, on one side, and you're trying, oh, you need to stretch more to get, they won't. They won't be able to. You can say that all you want. They'll stretch all the tissues off maybe, but it's fused, it's fixed. It's not going to move anymore. So it's more of an awareness rather than give them a separate exercise to do. And as you'll stress, as I always do, and to cover your little backside as well as being genuine, everything is pain-free, not discomfort-free. You want discomfort. They've got to put a stress on their body. You put a stressor on your body so your body can adapt, and improve to that stressor. But you don't want to do it to, all things being equal, you don't want to do it to pain. Arthritis is another one that people can have, but again, almost anywhere in the body, they will know what they can do. In which case, sometimes they'll always, like fibromyalgia, they may vary, that's the sort of exception to the rule of the pain bit. And again, they'll usually know what they can do, what they can manage themselves into what's doable and what might aggravate them. Okay with that? So it's not necessarily there's any specific exercises to do for someone with that.
I've had someone who's had a complete rod up the whole back. Sometimes people with scoliosis, they go and have surgery and they have rods put in their back to try and keep the spine straight.
But you would still then, they'd still have a go at.
Yeah, I mean, they
as to
can't do
what-
roll-ups or anything. It's quite hard when someone's got a full rod because
Yeah.
no flexion at all in the
Yeah.
spine. I've had someone who's had the lumbar spine all fused, rodded, and like doing roll-ups and stuff and then it's like virtually impossible. It's just like giving them loads of cushions or stuff under their back or even using the triangle so that the first part of that they've got help with because they just can't bend. So if you were doing a roll down or something, you would do half a roll down.
Yeah.
So if you were like let's say that part of the spine's fused, they can do the roll down until the point where they can't go anymore and then they come up. Otherwise you might end up with them doing a flat back one, which is kind of moving away from why you do one, but there's no reason why they couldn't do half one,
Yeah.
depending on where the fuse is.
Wow.
But just be aware because you will get, it's quite common that you will get someone coming to the class and go, oh, I've got a fused vertebra.
Yeah.
Or a fused
The only other thing
spine.
that you need to be aware of, we've had it in the early days, we've knocked it out of them though. Well-meaning people laying on the mat next to them saying, oh no, you want to be doing this and you want to be doing that, and you sort of know, you don't know what issues they've got because it's some bits of pride. They don't know, they're just looking at someone doing, don't do it like that. But they're well-meaning, but they'll give them, and you sort of think, no, because it's going to harm them.
So if somebody came to you and said, I've got a fused bit or I've got a rod there, you'd say, have a go, but, you know, so we're doing the particular exercise, do what you can to...
I would,
Or would you...
I would try and modify it for them first.
Okay, so you know that they wouldn't be able to, for example, sort of...
Yeah. So let's say you were going to do half rollbacks.
Yeah.
And I had someone that had a fused whole spine.
Yeah.
I would get them on their back and do pelvic tilt
Okay.
because you're taking the spine out of that, and then they're still getting the abdominal contraction with the pelvic tilt.
Yeah.
So in their heads, they're thinking of sending their belly button to the floor, but there's not actually. They're very protected when they're on their back because there's not really that much movement you can get in your back. So it's like, is there a different position you can put them in where they'll still get some kind of benefit? Because even if someone's got a rod in their back, they still want strong abdominal muscles, you still want a strong core. So it's just like, can you put them in a different position? It's very, especially with a full rod.
Very challenging.
So
Don't
hard.
be afraid to say you're not suitable for the class. We've had clients like that. Either one-to-one or I'm afraid because of the issues, we can't really work you into a class.
Hopefully, if they're not necessarily just... people with those sorts of issues wouldn't normally just walk into a class in a gym, would they?
Well, we always do, no one's allowed to attend any of our classes until you've
you've
done a
had it.
questionnaire.
Yeah. The only issue is
But
if
you know
you're in a gym when people just sort of turn up because they've signed up to a
that's
class.
what's
But
so
just
hard.
those people with those sorts of issues would
They
be
kind of know
much
that
less
They
anyway.
usually know
likely.
they know the limitations.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very rare.
They just sort of come in
They'll-
and try.
yeah. People that have got arthritis and stuff, I mean, they're quite. I've only got one client, and I'm not going to say, I won't say no, but she has got an issue with the leg, which only now, and she's been with me for about 6 years, only now will acknowledge it in front of other people. Whereas before, it's like she didn't want you to acknowledge that in the class.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything. People can have issues. It doesn't got to be anything which objectively seems embarrassing or something to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
It's something quite. You think, okay, it's quite normal. A cramp up regular in your calf.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
So she would come and like tell you in the corner,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
she was like, and it can be quite hard to then try and help to modify the exercises without bringing attention to it.
Yeah. I suppose some people just don't want the attention, do they? They want to stand at the back of the class. They don't want their names.
Well,
Yeah.
that's why you've got to keep an eye on other people, well-meaning,
Yeah.
giving them stuff to do or suggesting
Yeah.
they do it a certain way, which is actually detrimental to their.
But I do think people that have got these kinds of issues are quite forthcoming with it because they don't want to get hurt,
No.
and they do appreciate that the teacher needs to know.
Yeah.
So if somebody who came to you with a fused vertebrae and you didn't park you, would you send them off to a doctor first?
I personally wouldn't, but then I've always got Paul here.
I
What would
suppose.
we do?
It depends.
But
A lot of it will
they
depend on the
already know,
insurance.
so,
Yeah.
if they already know they've got a fused vertebrae, then they've had some medical
It's like, have they had the fused
Information.
vertebrae yesterday or was it 30 years ago?
Yeah.
What has their consultant said?
Okay, fine.
So I'm like, if it's an old one, if it was a month or a year or 2 years, I'd be going, yeah, but you've got to go to Paul's class. Because he's got more qualifications than I and more expertise. If it was an old one and someone's had it, let's say 5+ years, then that's fine, you can come to my class. It's the same as when people's had a hip replacement or knee replacement. But what has your consultant said? And if you're not comfortable, you can ask the consultant for a letter or for them to get a letter from their doctor or physio or...
Consultants are normally very good. It's the GPs that tend to be a pain in the butt. Consultants are normally very good. And they'll usually tell them as well. People are much more educated now. They'll tell them what they can do, what they shouldn't do, as in outright, and then what they can do. But the consultant is usually the guy that's done the surgery, so they'll know, because there's loads of different types of procedures you can do for almost anything, like even hip replacements. There's different types of procedures out there which more and more they're saying, yeah, you can do this, you can do that, but in the past it would be a case of, well, you can't do this or that. That's all I wanted to comment on, really, to be honest with you. There's nothing special other than they'll usually know themselves how much they can push themselves, for want of a better expression, on what's a no-no.
Can I ask just a random question?
Yeah, cool.
So almost the opposite to that, when people like are contortionists and they can bend themselves into, so what's gone on there? Because that's obviously quite far away from the norm in terms of flexibility.
Yeah, it can be.
Spine.
I'll use the Chinese state circus as a good example. Actually, they start when they're about that big and they get into all sorts. Well, I don't like a lot of the yogas out there because you're stretching ligaments off beyond the shape, and then you're knackered. Then you get a lot of ballet dancers in older age. If I'm still getting younger, they're just knackered the joints up because you're stretching ligaments. You don't want ligaments stretched.
So that's
You've
what's
got to be careful.
happened to get them into that. So they're
I think some people are
There's-
naturally
right.
like that, but...
okay.
It can be genetic, it can be chemical, so you can
Yeah.
get or hormonal, I should say. So your
So
hormones can
relax, so
affect
lots of
it.
relaxing
Yeah,
in the system.
it can affect your ligaments